Look down at the soil beneath your feet. Hidden in the microscopic shadows, beneath decaying leaves and damp earth, exists an ancient world governed by a simple, terrifying rule. In the domain of the arthropods, mercy is a biological impossibility. For the modern human, a centipede darting across a dark room triggers an involuntary ancestral panic. It is a primal reflex, a physiological warning etched into our genetic code, whispering that things with too many legs, things that scurry in the dark, are inherently dangerous. But we comfort ourselves with scale. We reassure our rational minds that these armored nightmares are small, insignificant, easily crushed under the heel of a shoe. We were wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. Rewind the clock. Look back 300 million years. Long before the first dinosaur tore flesh from bone, long before the asteroid reset the biological hierarchy of the planet, the Earth was an alien, hostile environment. Welcome to the Carboniferous period. This was not a world of sunlight and open plains. This was a claustrophobic, suffocating nightmare. Imagine an endless global swamp. Forests of towering scale-barked trees reaching 100 feet into the sky, their canopies so dense they choked out the sun. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of decomposing matter and rotting vegetation. But the most dangerous aspect of this era was not the darkness. It was the air itself. Today, the atmosphere you breathe is composed of roughly 21% oxygen. It is a delicate balance that sustains life as we know it. But in the deep shadows of the Carboniferous, the oxygen levels surged to an unimaginable 35%. This invisible, atmospheric mutation fundamentally broke the established laws of physics and biology. It acted as an evolutionary steroid, a relentless catalyst that fueled a biological arms race of terrifying proportions. In this hyper-oxygenated greenhouse, the invertebrates did not just survive, they conquered. The limitations of their passive respiratory systems were shattered, and in the black mud of these rotting forests, nature engineered its most grotesque masterpiece. Imagine a creature constructed entirely of biological armor plating, a segmented, faceless dreadnought sliding silently through the toxic mist. This is Arthropleura, the undisputed titan of the Carboniferous undergrowth. Forget every nature documentary you have ever seen. Forget the apex predators of the modern era. When you picture a deadly animal, you imagine the roar of a lion, the speed of a cheetah, the crushing jaws of a crocodile. But true, primordial terror does not roar. True terror is silent. It is a calculated, methodical machine of survival. Arthropleura reached a staggering length of over 8 feet. Let that reality sink into your mind. An armored, crawling invertebrate, the size of an adult crocodile. It possessed a width of nearly 2 feet, a massive, flattened profile that allowed it to distribute its immense weight, estimated at over 100 pounds, across the treacherous, unstable mud of the primeval swamps. Think about the mechanical reality of its existence. In our modern world, an insect is limited by the way oxygen diffuses through its body. If you were to magically enlarge a centipede to the size of Arthropleura today, it would instantly collapse under the crushing weight of its own exoskeleton. Its internal organs would rupture. It would suffocate within minutes. But the Carboniferous Earth supported this monstrosity. The dense, oxygen-rich air acted as an invisible scaffold, holding up a nightmare that simply should not exist. To encounter this anomaly would be an exercise in absolute psychological horror. There was no escape in the verticality of the forest, for it could navigate the fallen giants of the swamp with terrifying efficiency. It possessed up to 64 individual, heavily muscled legs. Each limb was a marvel of biomechanical engineering, designed for relentless, unstoppable propulsion. It did not just walk, It flowed over the terrain. The synchronized movement created a wave of motion that rippled down its armored body, allowing it to glide over uneven, treacherous ground without ever losing its balance or momentum. Imagine the sheer psychological terror of the smaller fauna of that era. To be a primitive amphibian, hiding beneath a rotting log and feeling the ground begin to vibrate. Not the heavy, percussive thud of a dinosaur footprint, but a continuous, vibrating hum. The sound of dozens of armored limbs dragging a 100-pound behemoth through the mud. You would not see it coming in the dark. You would only feel the pressure change in the air, smell the overwhelming scent of disturbed, rotting earth, and hear the metallic scraping of its plates before the darkness consumed you. But the true nightmare of Arthropleura lies in the shadows of what we do not know. The scientific community has debated its diet for decades. Was it a passive consumer of rotting wood? A gigantic detritivore recycling the endless dead matter of the Carboniferous? Or was it something far more sinister? The absolute, terrifying truth is hidden in a paleontological blind spot. We have never found a complete, perfectly preserved skull with its mandibles intact. The most crucial piece of evidence, the very instruments it used to interact with its world, are missing from the archives of history. This absence of evidence is not proof of innocence. In an ecosystem defined by extreme survival, where amphibians the size of wolves stalked the murky waters, it is a dangerous assumption to believe that a creature of this magnitude, armored like a warship, was completely harmless. Nature does not invest heavily in impenetrable armor and massive size without a reason. The lack of a head fossil leaves open a horrifying possibility. A dark thesis that forces us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about the era of the giant bugs. What if Arthropleura was not just a scavenger? Consider the sheer volume of fuel required to operate a biological machine equipped with up to 64 legs. Paleontologists have meticulously examined the fossil record. They have discovered fossilized spores, lycopod debris, and primitive plant matter within the gut regions of smaller, related specimens. For decades, this led to a comfortable, conservative assumption. The scientific community painted Arthropleura as a peaceful, slow-moving vegetarian, blindly grazing on the rotting ferns of the Carboniferous floor. But this comfortable hypothesis completely ignores the brutal, uncompromising reality of nature. Herbivory, in its purest form, is a luxury. It requires a stable environment and highly nutritious food sources. In the hyper-competitive, claustrophobic death trap of the primeval swamps, calories were the ultimate currency. Life was an endless, desperate war against starvation. The plant matter of that ancient era possessed incredibly low nutritional density. To sustain a biological engine weighing over 100 pounds, an exclusively herbivorous Arthropleura would have to consume an impossible volume of rotting vegetation every single day. It would be forced to eat constantly, never resting, operating on a razor-thin margin of survival. This mathematical deficit leads us to a darker, far more unsettling biological mystery. What actually happens when a creature of this immense scale, driven by an insatiable caloric void, encounters a wounded or dying animal in the mud? Nature is deeply opportunistic. It does not waste protein. Even modern, documented herbivores like deer or cattle have been recorded consuming small birds or carrion when their bodies demand specific minerals to survive. Now, scale that opportunistic, blind hunger up to an armored giant the size of an adult crocodile. It is highly probable that Arthropleura was a facultative scavenger, a terrifying, silent opportunist of the highest order. Imagine a primitive, lung-breathing amphibian, horribly injured after a territorial dispute with a larger predator, bleeding out on the edge of a stagnant black pool. Without complex eyes, how does the titan locate its prey in the pitch-black undergrowth? It does not need to see. It feels. It tastes the air. Arthropods navigate their environment through an incredibly sophisticated array of chemosensory hairs. Every millimeter of its segmented armor, every joint of its 64 heavy legs, was likely covered in microscopic receptors capable of detecting the chemical signature of decay, fear, and blood from incredible distances. The wounded amphibian would not see the threat approaching. It would only feel the pressure change. The rhythmic, mechanical drumming of the titan dragging its 100-pound mass through the swamp. When the Arthropleura finally arrived, it would not deliver a swift, predatory bite like a modern tiger or a wolf. It lacked the specialized canine teeth of a mammalian carnivore. Instead, its mandibles, hidden beneath its heavy headplate, would function as slow, industrial crushers. It would simply glide over the dying creature, pinning it to the earth beneath its immense, flattened underbelly. The victim would be suffocated in the mud under the sheer weight of the invertebrate. Then, the mechanical dismemberment would begin, a slow, agonizing process of grinding bone and tearing flesh piece by piece while the victim was likely still semi-conscious. This is the true reality of the Carboniferous, a world without mercy, ruled by the cold, calculated efficiency of giant insects. If you find yourself captivated by the brutal, uncompromising reality of these ancient biological machines, and you want to support our deep dive into the darkest corners of paleontological history, leave a comment below with the word Titan. Every comment signals the algorithm to declassify more of these forgotten files, helping us uncover the monstrous creatures that time tried to bury. Now, let us return to the shadows and examine another paradox. Why did it need such heavy, impenetrable armor? The thick, chitinous plates running down its back were incredibly dense. They were not just for show. They were a necessary, desperate defense mechanism against an ecosystem designed to kill everything it touched. While Arthropleura ruled the mud, the canopy above was patrolled by Meganura, an aerial nightmare. A predatory, hyper-aggressive dragonfly with a wingspan of over 2 feet. While Meganura primarily hunted smaller insects on the wing, a newly hatched juvenile Arthropleura would be a prime target from the skies, snatched from the ground, and devoured alive. And in the deeper, murky waters, massive amphibians, some exceeding 10 feet in length, waited in silent ambush. The armor of Arthropleura was its only insurance policy. A fortress of biological steel that allowed it to traverse the highly dangerous threshold between the deep water and the dense forest. But this armor, its greatest strength, presents the most terrifying biological vulnerability of all. A fatal flaw shared by every arthropod on Earth. In order to grow, they must shed their exoskeleton. This process is known as molting. For a creature the size of Arthropleura, molting would not just be a simple biological function. It would be a catastrophic, life-threatening physiological event. Imagine the sheer claustrophobic horror of a 100-pound arthropod attempting to pull its soft, highly vulnerable internal organs out of its own hardened shell. The energy expenditure would be astronomical. The risk of getting stuck and dying a slow, agonizing death of starvation trapped within its own armor was incredibly high. During this molting phase, the undisputed titan of the Carboniferous was entirely defenseless. Its new exoskeleton would be pale, soft, and completely useless against the jaws of an amphibian or the crushing weight of a rival Arthropleura. It would have to hide, deep within the rotting heart of a fallen lycopod tree or buried deep in the suffocating black mud. The giant would wait in total darkness. But this period of extreme vulnerability raises a deeply disturbing question about its internal anatomy. If the hyper-oxygenated atmosphere was the only thing keeping it from collapsing under its own weight, how did its soft, unsupported respiratory system function without the rigid structure of its exoskeleton during the molt? Did it enter a terrifying state of near death? A biological stasis where its heart rate dropped to a crawl, teetering on the very edge of suffocation while its new armor hardened in the dark? To understand how this behemoth survived the agonizing vulnerability of its molt without collapsing its own respiratory system, we must examine a biological mechanism that defies our modern understanding of anatomy. The answer to how it breathed without the rigid support of its shell is as alien as the creature itself. It did not possess lungs. There were no internal sacs expanding and contracting to draw in the dense atmosphere. Instead, the Titan relied on a passive, highly efficient network of spiracles. These were hundreds of microscopic pores lining the sides of its heavily armored segments. These pores connected directly to a vast, intricate network of tracheal tubes that penetrated deep into every muscle fiber, every nerve cluster, and every joint of its 64 legs. In our world, this passive system restricts insects to a minuscule size. The oxygen simply cannot travel far enough into the tissue. But in a world overflowing with 35% oxygen, the air itself was aggressive. The oxygen literally forced its way into the creature. Every single movement, every mechanical stride, every contraction of its massive body acted as a biological pump, forcing the hyper-oxygenated air deeper into its core. During the molt, when it lay paralyzed and soft in the dark, it survived by entering a state of extreme metabolic depression. It became a living ghost. It slowed its heart rate to a near stop, requiring almost zero energy, allowing the rich atmosphere to passively seep into its open spiracles, keeping the brain alive by the narrowest of margins while the new armor hardened. But this biological revelation, the answer to its survival, immediately gives birth to a far darker mystery. If the creature was a biological combustion engine, running on a rich, volatile mixture of 35% oxygen, what happens when the environment itself becomes unstable? We view oxygen as the breath of life, but in extreme concentrations, it is a highly reactive, lethal catalyst. The Carboniferous swamp was not just a suffocating greenhouse, it was a global, ticking time bomb. The sheer volume of decaying plant matter produced massive quantities of methane gas bubbling up from the black mud. Combined with the extreme oxygen levels, the very air was fundamentally flammable. Every single lightning strike from the violent prehistoric storms that ravaged the planet had the potential to ignite the atmosphere itself. Imagine existing in a state of constant instinctual paranoia. The Arthropleura was entirely blind, lacking complex eyes to see the horizon. It navigated its explosive world entirely through vibration and chemical reception. It existed in a sensory realm of pure, calculated data. It felt the atmospheric pressure drop before a storm. It tasted the microscopic ash falling on its antennae from fires burning hundreds of miles away. This hypersensitivity dictated its hunting and territorial tactics. Because it could not see, it relied on a brutal, uncompromising system of chemical dominance. Consider the terrifying reality of two fully grown titans crossing paths in the pitch-black undergrowth. A territorial dispute between two adult Arthropleura was not a display of roaring or posturing. It was a spectacle of pure, mechanical violence. When two dreadnoughts, each weighing over 100 pounds, collided in the dark, they would rear up on their hind segments, exposing their heavily armored undersides. They would grapple blindly, using their massive, crushing mandibles to seek out the weak points in the rival armor. The joints, the spiracles, the vulnerable tissue beneath the heavy plates. It was a silent, desperate wrestling match in the mud. The winner would often severely maim or dismember the loser. And in an ecosystem where calories were the ultimate prize, cannibalism was not an anomaly. It was an absolute certainty. The victor would slowly, methodically consume the remains of its rival, recycling the precious armor and protein to sustain its massive bulk. This was the brutal reality of the ancient Earth, an endless cycle of growth, slaughter, and survival in the dark. We are piecing together the forgotten history of our planet, uncovering the truth buried beneath millions of years of rock and ash. We are exposing the monsters that science textbooks have sanitized for public consumption. If you seek to understand the darkest, most terrifying realities of evolutionary history, subscribe to the channel now. Join the investigation before these files are sealed away once again. The Arthropleura ruled this chaotic world as an untouchable god of the undergrowth. Its armor protected it from predators. Its size made it an unstoppable force. The hyper-oxygenated air fueled its massive mechanical body. But evolution is a cruel, unpredictable architect. The very environment that gave birth to this nightmare, the invisible atmospheric mutation that allowed it to break the laws of physics, was slowly beginning to shift. A planetary change was coming. A catastrophic shift in the climate that would trap the Titan in a biological prison of its own making. The undisputed ruler of the swamps was about to face an enemy that no amount of armor could stop. An invisible threat that would strip away its colossal power segment by segment and erase it from the face of the earth. The reign of the giant arthropods was not ended by a sudden, violent cataclysm. There was no catastrophic asteroid impact to black out the sun. No explosive global extinction event to grant them a swift, merciful death. Their demise was far more agonizing. It was a slow, invisible strangulation, engineered by the Earth itself. Over millions of years, the climate of the planet began to shift. The endless, humid swamps that blanketed the continents started to dry out. The towering, scale-barked trees that provided the dense canopy died in massive numbers, replaced by early conifers and seed ferns that could survive in the arid soil. This event is known in the paleontological record as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. And as the global forest withered and collapsed, the massive organic oxygen factory of the planet began to shut down. The atmospheric oxygen, the invisible evolutionary steroid that had engineered this monstrous scale, began to plummet. It dropped steadily from 35% down to 15%. For the Arthropleura, this planetary shift was an inescapable death sentence. Imagine the sheer psychological and physical horror of their final generations. The passive respiratory system, the intricate network of spiracles and tracheal tubes that had served them so perfectly in the hyper-oxygenated swamps was no longer enough. The air was thinning. Every single step required massive energy, but the atmosphere could no longer supply the volatile fuel required to keep their organic engines running. The Titans were literally suffocating under the crushing weight of their own impenetrable armor. A biological machine weighing over 100 pounds was slowly shutting down. They could not molt because the sheer energy deficit was too severe. Attempting to shed their heavy exoskeleton in an oxygen-starved environment would result in immediate cardiac arrest. They could no longer hunt or scavenge, lacking the stamina to overpower even the weakest prey. They could only drag themselves into the deepest, darkest crevices of the dying swamps, waiting in the shadows for an oxygen high that would never return. Whole generations simply stopped moving. The armored dreadnoughts, once the undisputed gods of the undergrowth, became petrified tombs. This is the true, terrifying resolution of our dark thesis. The tyranny of scale. The very adaptation that made them the ultimate apex predators, their immense, terrifying size, became the exact mechanism of their total destruction. Evolution built a masterpiece of mechanical horror, a creature perfectly designed to dominate a specific environment, and then the Earth simply changed the rules of physics. The Carboniferous period serves as a chilling reminder of our own biological fragility. It proves that the hierarchy of nature is completely temporary. Today, we look at the tiny millipedes and centipedes hiding in the damp, forgotten corners of our homes, and we feel a false sense of superiority. We believe we are the masters of the earth because of our size, our weapons, and our intellect. We crush them under our shoes without a second thought. But those small, scurrying creatures are the ultimate survivors. They are the resilient remnants of a dark dynasty that ruled this planet long before the first mammal ever drew breath. They survived the suffocating collapse of their world by shrinking, by hiding in the cracks, by waiting in the dark. And you must understand one final, unsettling truth. The genetic blueprint for the Titan still exists. It is locked away in the DNA of every crawling arthropod on Earth. All it requires is another shift in the atmosphere, a change in the air, and the nightmare could easily rise again. Contain countless more files of anatomical horror, apex predators that time has tried to bury, and existential anomalies that modern science struggles to explain. If you are prepared to face the true, uncompromising nature of our planet, check the link in the description below to secure your copy of our exclusive ebook about extinct megafauna. This highly detailed dossier expands heavily on the nightmare creatures we investigate on this channel, offering uncensored scientific breakdowns of the most lethal animals to ever exist. To fund our ongoing research and help us unearth the next terrifying biological anomaly, consider supporting our investigative team directly on our Patreon or through Buy Me a Coffee. The links to support the project are in the description. Trust nothing in the shadows. We will see you in the next archive.